you guys were all okay with the name Loose Cannons. I don't think it's 100%
Oh,
fit here, but I was just going to
yeah,
use
yeah.
it.
I'm okay with that name. It
Yeah.
sounds good.
I like it. I
Right.
mean,
So
yeah, it's better to have a name than no
so
name.
I'll do the intro, like the actual. That's all the information that we want for archival purposes or whatever, and I'll do the intro, and then if other people want to do the intro in future episodes, that's fine. So that you know roughly how it's done.
Okay.
So, hello everyone. This is Loose Cannons with Reuben, Patrick, and Basil. We're going to be discussing Michael Haneke's Code Unknown, released in 2000 today. We all watched it this past week, and we're just going to talk about our thoughts. Yeah, does anyone want to kick us off with anything?
I mean, I guess the main thing that struck me about the movie that would be a discussion point, because I didn't have any specific like I've been thinking about it a little bit, but no real answer as to why the very beginning of the movie is the only part that has a cut from scene, like in scene editing. Each of the following scenes all are done in single
Well, I didn't even
shots.
notice that.
Yeah, the very
lack of cuts.
Oh yeah, the very opening sequence with the deaf person acting something out, the child, and then the rest of the children are trying to guess what she just acted out. There's cutting back and forth between the different guessing, but then after that, the rest of the movie is all single take. And I guess I have no idea what Haneke, I've never pronounced his name before out loud, has.
I couldn't tell you why the first scene has cuts, but certainly the other scenes lack of cutting has something to do with the sort of self-containedness of the stories and the idea that like you're really supposed to be in those individual moments, and that that there's a subtitle for the movie. Patrick still has the information pulled up. He can read it out for us.
The subtitle of the film is Incomplete Tales of Several Journeys.
So yeah, I think that's sort of a visual representation of that idea of these just little pieces, as opposed to some sort of with cuts and stuff like that, it always gives more of an impression of like a finished piece, and so that continuing that trend of sort of these little vignettes that are just supposed to I don't like using the word realistic, but are just, I guess, maybe more emotionally realistic. They're just supposed to be kind of like raw in the moment. I think that's probably why he does that with the lack of cuts, but I don't know why, other than it just makes the scene, I think it would be confusing with, cutting back and forth without cutting back and forth between the child who's indicating that the other children are guessing wrong. If it was just like a camera like spinning around over and over again, he might just have done that just because it wouldn't work and he couldn't figure out any other way to do the scene.
And it also...
And still include the other children.
You're right. It also, I noticed, did the thing that famous Russian experiment did of it cuts back and forth, and many times, not every time, but many times, it uses the exact same shot of the girl shaking her head no. There's one exception, which is when somebody guesses gangster, but other than that, I think it's almost always her reaction is exactly the same.
Yeah, it's the Kuleshov effect, I think is what it's called.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We kind of got technical really quickly, but maybe everyone should just start off with whether or not they liked it.
Oh, and, good call.
Well, I would say,
and just mention that and maybe a brief.
Yeah, I would say that
what they liked.
It's definitely my favorite Michael Haneke movie that I've seen thus far. But the only other two films of his that I've seen are Funny Games and Cache, and I kind of hated both of those movies. So,
what did you think of this one? Was it okay?
This one was it was just okay. It wasn't amazing. I wasn't like, oh, he's really saying something deep. it was devoid of the kind of heavy-handed moralizing that he has in his other films that I've seen, and so I was thankful for that. And I enjoy Juliette Binoche almost all the time, and in general, I thought the performances were good. I just didn't find anything that really stood out that I could really latch on to. That I was just like, oh, this is something that I really love about it. It was just like things I was like, okay, that was nice. That was kind of nice. But other parts, I just didn't really see the point in. Like, in general, I don't see the point in his, like, sort of moralizing overtones that he always adds to there. It's like, hey, this racism is happening, or this, institutional injustice is happening. Like, I don't know, it it certainly is happening. Like, I know that exists in the world. I don't really need to hear about it from your movie, but okay.
Yeah, I really liked it, and I did not like Cache. That's the only other film of his directed by him that I've seen, and I wanted to give him another chance, and this was the one that I had heard was his best work, and it didn't feel heavy-handed to me personally, maybe just because I don't consider people to be as aware of those problems as I would like, for one thing. And then second of all is that I didn't feel as if the rest of the movie, told you how to feel about those scenes as strongly as different parts in Cache. I definitely felt that about Cache, and I've definitely heard that about Funny Games, even from people who really like him, that it's, extremely heavy-handed. But this movie really, really worked for me, and I think it had actually a lot to do with the aesthetics. Simply that with Cache, it looked really too clean for me, and I don't have sort of a universal type of aesthetics that I like. In a vacuum, Cache looks better than Code Unknown. Code Unknown looks cheaper. But I thought that it worked. It kind of reminded me a little bit of John Carpenter. Not in like, he didn't have any like super wide angles or anything like that, but just like the sort of ominous feelings and the way how every scene sort of had like a weird, intense energy to it.
I will go ahead and say that I didn't really like it that much. I thought it was alright. I thought it sort of wavered between, I guess I would find myself maybe in between, I'm not sure. I felt that there were definitely moments that I thought were a little over the top and like too dour in a way that the film hadn't really earned. And it's funny that like you didn't even notice the like continuous shot thing, because it actually distracted me quite a bit through most of the movie. It felt a little bit show-offy, like, I don't know, just like film-makey, like he was just, I don't know, I'm not going.
I know what you mean.
He was like he was showing off, like, hey, I can do this all in one take. Look how cool this is. But no, I kind of like the long take structure. Like, I don't begrudge him that. This was at least much more interesting than what he was doing in Cache, where he would just like sit the camera still and just let it like hang there and nothing would happen for just long stretches of time. Whereas in this one, it was like he was cutting down to the relevant action of the scene. It was like, here's something that's relevant to what I'm trying to say, and that's the little bit I'm going to get you. And I don't begrudge him that. Like, I don't have a problem with the way the film was made, and I kind of enjoy the technical aspect of how that kind of first long scene is done, where they're trucking, just back and forth, following the characters, kind of showing the relevant action. I don't like his message that he's putting into it, which is just like, it's basically like, oh, well, of course, because in that first scene, I guess I should talk about what happens. There's a kid shows up in Paris.
Okay,
and
the first scene is the deaf children playing charades.
I was going to say,
but the first scene involving the plot or the characters that actually are the.
I almost feel like those deaf children, though, are like a bookend in a way. Like, they are. Yeah, they're kind of like the prologue, epilogue to the movie. And scene 1 feels like it's the one where the kid, Jean, meets Juliette Binoche in Paris, and he's talking to her about running away from the farm. And then they eat the pastries together, and then he throws, his trash into the lap of the beggar woman. I can't remember where she's from, like Romania or something like that. And then
I think she's from Kosovo.
Kosovo, is it?
Yeah,
I couldn't remember exactly what.
Because
country.
that's where the photographer, he's been filming,
Okay.
taking pictures in the war-torn Kosovo, and I think that's supposed to be the connection between the two of them.
But then the black kid, I think his name is Amado, I think is his name in the movie, comes up and confronts him and says, "Hey, that was rude, what you did, throwing that in the lady's lap. You should go apologize to her." And then there's this kind of scuffle, and of course it's this... It's like this. It feels like a movie escalation thing. It's like a typical, like, oh, things are going to escalate and get out of control here because of this one little thing that happened. And of course the police show up, and the police are big racists, and they're like, oh, the black person did something bad. And I was just like, oh, this. I don't like your message here. I kind of like the way that you shot all of this, but it feels really stagey once things start kind of spinning out of control. From that point, it's just like, oh no, he's gonna, get into a scuffle with the police officers, and they're gonna think he's the bad guy, and it's...
The only thing that I didn't think didn't work for me there is that I didn't understand why he didn't just explain what was happening. He kept explaining that he was going to explain what was happening, and never told the police what had actually happened. I actually, to me, it was surprising because it was actually somewhat true to life and not how in movies that I felt like that was kind of an honest portrayal of that type of moment. Not that most people that's not how it would start, like a moment of genuine kindness standing up for a homeless lady, but that's how those things end. I think how they end, it's very true. In particular, I liked a lot when he was like, he's like, I'm gonna come with you. He's talking to the cop, and he says, I'm coming with you. I'm coming of my own free will. Don't touch me. I'm getting in the car. And the cop was like, get in the car, and he kept like pushing him. And he's like, don't make me use my handcuffs. And it was like, he was just completely not paying any attention to what he was saying. He's like, I'm coming with you. I really liked that moment from that scene.
Well, yeah, but like you were saying, when he doesn't actually explain the situation, that was what felt stagey to me. It's like, oh, he's not explaining it because the movie doesn't need him to explain it. It doesn't need him to actually tell them what's going on because it needs it to escalate further against him. And so if he explains it, they're going to be like, oh, well, that was the situation. But he doesn't explain it because the movie needs, to escalate against him, basically. And it took me out of the moment. I was like, okay, you're plot walling this guy's explanation from happening right now.
I think the thing that felt most sort of not... I mostly agree with Reuben that I like the way some of the scene was handled in terms of how they treated him, but agree that the beginning of it is pretty wonky. But I also didn't like... I mean, it makes the rest of the movie possible, I guess, but it did seem sort of like typical cynicism of what I've come to know from watching like 3 of his movies, that the black guy trying to intervene on behalf of this woman actually ends up being a really horrible thing for her. She ends up being deported because... And I was just like, really? Like, that, I mean, something like that always bothers me, that it's...
Well, that's the thing, and that's kind of getting back to Patrick's point, which is why I want to say, like, part of why this movie worked for me and Cache didn't, is because, like, we see her getting deported and we're like, oh, that's so awful, and then she gets to Kosovo and she tells the story about how she treated a homeless person from where she was, and how she like ran home to like wash her hands because it was so dirty, and like she has like a home and a family in Kosovo, so it's kind of like we think it's going to be horrible. And I know it's not like the greatest filmmaking trick, but it kept sort of happening where it was like, we would like, okay, so like the black kid comes to the homeless person's aid, and then we think it's real, like it turns out really terrible for her, and he's supposed to be like kind of noble, but then when he's on the date, he's like kind of an asshole to the person that he's on a date with, and I kept feeling like every time they sort of introduced something, that he kept moving away from the easy conclusion and from the cynicism. I felt kind of like everything was spiraling outward. Like at the end of the movie, I didn't feel how Patrick felt at all. Like I didn't feel like I had a good grip on what he was saying, which could be its own complaint, but it worked in comparison to his other films, because in the other ones I was just sort of rolling my eyes and being like, I've seen this so much before.
Yeah, I will say that I don't know that I have the best grip on what exactly he's saying, but of the messages that I did get in the film, that was one of the ones where it felt a little like it was, Crash or something, where the Paul Haggis Crash, where it's like, racism is bad, like, and that's the whole message of the film. But I will say that not every scene felt that way. It was just, that was the most egregious thing that I saw in the movie. There were a few scenes though that I thought that he subverted, I guess, nicely for as far as his usual. Again, I've only seen 2 of his other films, but of what I've seen in those films, he subverts his own usual trappings. Specifically, the scene in the subway car at the end with Juliette Binoche.
I thought that was the best scene.
Yeah, and I did too, because she's getting hassled by this young kid, and he ends up like spitting on her, and then the old guy sitting next to her kicks him, and then just hands her his glasses and just stands up to the kid like he's ready to get hit in the face, but he's going to stand up to him anyway. And that was something it was like, oh, this is kind of hopeful and noble, and it's a really well acted scene, and it's a really well played out scene. And I was like, I didn't expect that kind of nobility from a character to actually do good in a Michael Haneke film, but it did. It ended up kind of being a good moment between the 2 of them.
Yeah, and kind of what I was saying before, that's another inversion, is because it's actually racially the flip side of the other scene, because it's a young Arab kid is the one who's mistreating her. So you've got the scene with like the noble black kid, and then you've got the scene with kind of an asshole Arab kid, mistreating the French natives, I guess. So I was glad that scene was in there, and that that to me plays into what I was saying before, which is that whenever I personally felt like I had a grip on what was going on, or like where the moral compass was, or what I was supposed to think, it kind of felt like he was, he started going in another direction. Except for that one kid, the one at the beginning who threw the trash into the
Jean, I believe is his name.
Yeah, he was just an ass throughout.
He was the worst character.
He was the worst. He was just he was unpleasant from beginning to end.
I was actually confused. I had to kind of read up to figure out what was going on in some of the scenes. The ones specifically where Juliette Binoche is like hearing her neighbors arguing, or I couldn't exactly tell what was supposed to be going on. I think that it was supposed to be like a child was being abused, and I couldn't tell. She gets you okay there, Reuben?
I'm just adjusting my camera.
Right. It keeps like making a lot of noise. Anyway, anyway, there's a scene. I believe there's supposed to be like a child of one of her neighbors that's being abused, and there's one scene where she hears it happening, and then she gets a letter from somebody, and I couldn't tell if the letter was supposed to be somebody like shaming her for not helping them, or if it was shaming her for saying something to them, or something like that.
I don't think there was any shame. I think the letter was asking for help.
Okay, so yeah,
was saying there's someone involved in the situation who didn't know what to do, and they had given a letter asking for help.
Okay, so
because when she's talking about it with her boyfriend, she's saying that the letter was not from the child, which would imply that the content could be confused for a child asking for help. So she thinks that the old lady wrote her asking her to help out with the situation.
Okay, I was a little confused about what was going on in that scene.
I was confused too, but by the relationships, I had to look that up. I didn't understand that that guy at the beginning and her boyfriend were brothers at first.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, it took me almost 3/4 of the movie to figure that out.
Like at first, I thought that it was her son or her
yeah. That's what I thought at the beginning too.
And then I thought the farmer was his grandfather, but no, they were brothers, and she was the photographer's boyfriend, and he was yeah.
Okay.
Their
Yeah,
dad.
that took a little, I guess, clearing up the relationships between the characters, but I didn't. I guess
It felt overly obtuse to like not just like say,
I think I
who he was.
I don't know. I felt really weird about the scene where she goes to the funeral for the child because I don't know. Like,
Was it for the child? How could
was
you
it?
tell?
I couldn't.
I don't know who that funeral
I don't know
was
for either. I thought
it was another scene that was overly obtuse.
yeah,
in my
and then
opinion.
she's like walking next to her neighbor. I think at the end of it, and I couldn't tell if that was supposed to be.
I couldn't tell if it was the old lady, but that was my assumption.
That's what I thought.
Based on
That's what I thought it was. There were parts of this movie, like there were little segments that were very confusing. In particular, the segment where there's a part toward the beginning. I think he's the father of the black kid that confronts Jean. He's the father of Amado and the taxi driver. And there's a scene. He's the father. And there's a scene early in the movie where it's sort of like them calling him to come to the police station to get Amado out of prison. And then there's a scene later where he's talking to one of his younger children, or I think it's one of his children, I can't remember, who's been having problems at school. And then there's another scene where he's like taken his taxi on a boat and driven back to Africa somewhere, I think. I couldn't really tell what that scene was supposed to be. It's just like his car drives off the boat and he's just like driving through crowds of people, and I was like, what is this scene even? Like, nobody talks in it. It doesn't say anything. I was just like, this has no connection to anything else that's happening in the movie. I don't understand.
There's a scene earlier where, or maybe it's earlier, yeah, I think it is, where someone is explaining to the child that the dad had to go to Africa and maybe he'll never be back, but it is also sort of obtuse in that we never understand his motivation for, he's just like, well, your dad's got to go back, like, that's just what he decided.
That was because I remember those conversations like between the mother and the child, where they're in the apartment together and they're talking, and I just didn't. I was like, why does he have to go back? What is he doing there? What connection does that have to the rest of the story? It just didn't. It was something that was just like completely off the map from everything else that was happening. I didn't really understand the significance of it at all.
I think it's going back to when you mentioned Paul Haggis's Crash. I think it's important to mention that because this movie is actually the inverse. It's not the Magnolia style where it starts off with all these disconnected people and then they all come together for some sort of glorious conclusion at the end. They all start off together and then they spiral further outward from their interactions. And I feel like, again, sort of with the making conclusions about this movie, that's how it works thematically too. If you start off with this scene that's fairly straightforward in how to read it, and then the longer you watch the movie, the less comfortable you feel interpreting it. Like even that opening scene sort of works as a metaphor for the whole movie, because when the young girl does her charades, for what it is, like I was like, oh, that's fear, and like it felt really obvious to me. And then every time someone guessed, I was like, oh, maybe I don't know what she was trying to do, because their guesses were so different from what I was thinking. I was like, oh, I know what this is, and I guess maybe it's not like the most interesting point to be made, but to me, it really felt like he was like, we don't know what this is, like what's going on, and it was definitely better than sort of I don't know, racism 101, I guess, for me.
So, I mean, yeah, I don't know. You think it's Haneke trying to say that we just don't really understand his films, or is it saying is it a broader thing of like, human beings don't really understand the world like they think they understand it?
I mean, I think it was about communication and sort of what limits communication we have, and I mean that's what children, using sign language and not being able to hear sort of immediately introduces the ideas of like what you can and can't understand, and those limitations. So I think communication and then also like interference is like a big thing in it, because there's like the scene where the photographer is on the train and he's surreptitiously taking people's pictures for his work, and it's like he completely gets away with that because he does it in a way that doesn't interfere with people, but then when other people interfere or not interfere, it can cause anxiety or can cause problems, for them in certain situations.
So, I'm curious, how do you think the scenes with Julia Binoche actually acting in the movies that she's in? She plays an actress in the film, and we get several scenes of her actually acting in that film. So how do you think that ties into that thematic thread of communication?
I'm not really sure. I watched this movie, a couple of days ago, and so I haven't spent inordinate amount of time processing it. But my first idea would be, she's shooting this thriller, where the plot of the film is that she's trapped in a room and the guy won't let her escape, and it's sort of a very straightforward problem solution type of scenario with sort of very straightforward reactions and emotions to the situation, and it's juxtaposes the rest of the film, which he's reminding us is not very straightforward and doesn't have straightforward solutions. And I think when we get to see a little bit of that film, and we don't know that it's the film at first, which she's in the pool with her.
I was gonna say that's actually the only other scene besides the first one that has actual editing in it, and
it's edited. Yeah, it's edited because it's a movie that's being shown on a screen,
but we don't know that at first.
Yeah.
So it's that scene is like really like emotionally like powerful and like moving, and when like seems like their son is about to fall off, but you're also really confused because you haven't been introduced to that guy, and then she's just making out with him, and it's like, is this in the future, like with that other guy, or is she like cheating on the one guy? And like you're totally confused at first, but you're like swept up in it, and I guess that kind of draws back to something that I saw Haneke say, which I actually hate, but it does kind of work in that moment. But he was talking about how European film is less narrative than American film because of the Nazis, and how they therefore weren't they'd experienced the negative effects of propaganda and like storytelling more so than Americans, and so Americans still like enjoyed narrative propagandist like emotional films, and like that, like putting that scene in the middle is like again sort of what I was saying with like the film versus reality debate, and with like the editing and stuff. I think he's just trying to say like, look at all these emotions you feel when it's so simple, but it's not simple and it's complex, and you shouldn't necessarily follow those simplistic emotions, which is exactly the type of thing that I normally hate about Haneke.
Which is that he's a dick to the audience. I mean, that's sort of my big problem with him.
Yeah, that he doesn't. There's a difference between like knowing something and like trying to like be playful with it, and like there's a difference between being a troll, which is simply just about getting a rise out of somebody, and like being puckish, like Puck from A Midsummer Night's Dream, which is about being playful and like helping people sort of realize their faults and the things that are missing. And everything that I've read that he said, he clearly can't do it with words speaking to another person. He comes off as extremely high-minded of himself and like what he's providing the world artistically. But for me, this movie works, and I just wanted to draw it back to what I was saying about John Carpenter, which is that in Carpenter's films, for the most part, the ones that I've seen, he sort of takes a fear and he makes it a metaphor and like explores that metaphor and gives this tension to these groups of people with Michael Myers or with an alien thing, and he fictionalizes it, and to me this was kind of like, it was a little bit like a horror film. I mean, it's not exactly like a horror film because there's nothing fantastical about it, and except for the fake scenes of Juliette Binoche, no one is like getting murdered or trapped or anything like that. But that it sort of had that same feeling, just without the metaphor. It was like, here's these things that we don't know how to deal with, that we can't unpack, and like that are legitimately terrifying about our world. And that's kind of why I thought that the subway scene was the best scene, because it did the best job of sort of like, she's on a crowded subway train. She's not like really at threat exactly, but it's a really scary and uncomfortable scene. Part of what makes me the most uncomfortable about it is his friend, the one who's not bothering her, who thinks it's funny, who just keeps like laughing in the background. He's like, that's funny that he's he won't leave this woman alone. That's hilarious. And I just got that sort of similar mood from John Carpenter's films, just without the monster. It was like the other is all around us, and it's in everything. You can't, like, it wasn't just put into like one thing. So it worked. I liked it a lot.
I like that scene too, although I mean, as a intentional mirror scene for the very first scene, it bothers me a little bit because again, it feels a little too much like Haneke's too aware of his own formalism and is very much kind of like showing off how smart he is with his ability to construct things, and that bothers me. There's a similar thing early in the movie where he is showing all the photos that the person took from Kosovo while the photographer is narrating and talking about his life, and that felt very reminiscent of La Jetée to me, and I was like, okay, we get it, you've seen movies, you're very smart.
Yeah, I definitely feel
very smart.
I feel that way 100% about Stanley Kubrick. Like, I can barely watch his films because they're so, to me, like, constructed. There's like nothing loose or fun or playful about them, and yeah, I definitely get that sense with Haneke's work too. I guess it just didn't bother me as much as it normally does in this one. Some of the ways in which it was constructed I really enjoyed. For instance, I love the if you remember the restaurant scene where like Juliette Binoche she sees them on the date and comes to sit down, and the photographer and another friend at the lunch are having an argument, and the friend is talking about whether or not he has the right or should be allowed to go to these places and take pictures of drought and starvation and war, and whether or not he's taking advantage of these people, and he's like, it's just honesty, I'm just putting it out there, I'm just saying, like, I want to make sure that everyone knows what's going on or whatever, and he takes like on this noble track about revealing what's going on in the world, and then later when Juliette Binoche is confronting him about trying to help the potentially being abused little girl next door, he's like, it's not my problem. well, war-torn Kosovo is even less your problem than your next door neighbor. Like, but apparently that's really important to him. And like little hypocrisies like that were sort of littered through, that were very intentional. Like, to me, I was like, that's the kind of thing that people do all the time, and it constantly makes me, angry and roll my eyes at other people and myself. I'm human and suffer those sort of issues too. But to me, there were like stuff like that. I found really enjoyable about the film when it was small. When it was really big and intentional, it wasn't enjoyable.
Yeah, for me, the smallest scenes were some of the ones that worked the best. For me, it felt like the movie kept wavering back and forth between scenes I really enjoyed and scenes I didn't. Like, I really enjoyed some of the small scenes on the farm with Jean and his father, and I really liked the performance of the dad as, like, a guy who almost never talks but is very, like, emotionally feeling. Like he's not a guy who is, like, terse and quiet because he is just like a jerk who doesn't care about anyone. It's just the way that he's been socialized, and then kind of afraid of showing emotion to his son and vulnerability, but kind of expressing it in indirect ways that end up not being very effective. But then contrasting scenes like that were like scenes like the grocery store scene between Juliette Binoche and her boyfriend, which felt so strangely melodramatic and at odds with some of the quietness of other scenes where suddenly they're fighting in a way that felt very constructed and movie-like, and I couldn't tell whether Haneke was doing that on purpose as a kind of way of trying to show off again and like manipulate the audience about like what they are choosing to respond to, but that scene really bothered me for some reason.
I guess I should mention that the boyfriend's name is Georges, multiple Georges.
Georges, correct.
Georges.
You don't pronounce the S
Georges?
at the end in
You
French.
don't say Georges?
It's just Georges.
It's just Georges.
He's not multiple Georges? I don't know.
Unless there's a vowel in the next word, then sometimes you say the S before the vowel.
I didn't find George as a character to be very interesting. I did kind of like the hypocrisy of him, arguing for the kind of grandiose moralism of taking pictures of war-torn countries and then not caring about his next door neighbor. But other than that, I can't remember any scenes where he as a character stood out ever. Like, I know that there are some scenes where it's like just him. I know he like makes a phone call to somebody at one point, or I can't even remember if he does anything else in the movie. He's just sort of there to.
He has the fight in the grocery store, and he makes that phone call, and then he and Juliette Binoche go to talk to his father about the phone.
About Jean.
I think that's it. I think John. I think that's the entirety of him in the film.
Yeah, he has the scene at the very end where he tries to get into the apartment and then can't.
Oh yeah, I didn't understand that either. I was confused by that.
Yeah, I didn't understand.
I thought that was sort of that was actually a scene that I really liked. I thought that sort of was intended to be like the logical extension of the previous scene or a scene earlier when Juliette Binoche and her co-star are recording the ADR for the swimming pool scene, that there's sort of a romantic thing almost going on where the director's like, it's not so hard to say he loves you, is it? And she looks at him, and there's kind of like a spark of a moment there that I think is intentional, and the idea maybe being that her and the Georges are drifting further apart, and that's why just like in the beginning of the movie, Jean mentions that she had changed the code and that's why he couldn't get into their apartment. Perhaps she has changed the code again, and that's like a way of separating herself from the Georges.
Yeah, I assume she had changed the locks.
Yeah, I didn't know if it had anything to do with what had happened on the subway, I guess just previous to that scene. I wasn't clear if that had anything to do with it or not. And
that would make sense too.
Yeah.
As a way of feeling safe, people often
just
do stuff like
that.
that.
Maybe she just like locked maybe she just put like an extra lock on the door or something. Yeah, because I know that's a possibility. I also was kind of interested in the scenes where they would cut back, and I wasn't sure if what they were cutting back to was the school for the deaf children or not, where they're playing the drums. I
really liked that scene. I actually think the one scene that's really cool, that was another one that I really, really liked, is the very first scene where they're doing that, because they're playing in basically a dance studio, and if you've ever heard someone play drums in a very small room, it is horrible to hear because it is extremely painful. But it's interesting that like that would be something that is something you can draw on as a way of creating music if you are hearing impaired, because the sound from the drums is so strong that it would create like a reverberation that you could feel in your body that is separate from the idea of hearing as we know it.
Yeah, and I liked that about it, because I got that. I was like, oh, okay, this must be the deaf kids, and they're playing the drums really loud because they can't really hear how loud it is, but they can feel the vibrations of the drums as they hit them, and as they, as the sound like bounces off the walls and stuff. And I was wondering what the significance of it was to leave it playing over the end, like the two end scenes there, kind of with Maria, the Kosovo lady, the Kosovo kind of beggar lady. I'm not sure.
Usually when something is kind of like left playing like long after you would expect it to stop playing, the meaning is meaninglessness, like to do something for so long that it stops giving you the feeling that it typically gives. That's how I saw it.
Okay, I was just wondering like why it kept playing all the way to the end of the movie. But I kind of liked that it kept playing over that first scene, because I was like, oh, it's kind of, I don't know, it was kind of deafening in a way that was sort of like aligning the audience with the deaf children themselves. Like, I don't know, I guess connecting our understanding of the world to the way the deaf children understand the music. It's like all they can feel is the rhythm and the reverberation. They can't really hear, how loud and how boisterous what they're doing really is. Like they can't hear the true sound of it. All they hear is, I guess sort of a ghost of what they are putting out there.
And there's no talking in that scene either, so that
there's no talking in either of those.
Makes it make more sense.
In either of those last two scenes
as well. That makes your point stronger.
Did the fatalism of that sort of bother you? That the woman makes it back to France, but again she's sort of in the same spot where she can't find anything, so she just has to.
I mean, I thought her story was the weakest of the. I guess the three groups at the beginning. I thought her story was the weakest by far.
Yeah, I liked it better when she was in her own country and seemed like she was happier actually there than trying to come to France to try and, I guess, I'm not really sure. I think she was trying to get a job at I can't remember what she said. She was trying to get a job in there, but I kind of like that when she goes back home, she's got all these friends, and the guy picks her up off the side of the road and takes her to her house, and it was just like she has this great community there. Like, why would she want to leave it?
Because it's war torn is the reason.
I suppose so. Yeah, I did, but you don't ever see that in the movie, though. You don't ever see. I guess
it's true.
You hear, I guess you hear people talk about it, but you don't ever see kind of the real suffering there. And I think maybe if you would,
I think that's sort of the point. I mean, you see it sort of in the buildings. A lot of the buildings look very run down and like they've been. Some of them be partially demolished, but I think that's actually one of my favorite parts about the movie, even though I agree that her overall story is pretty weak. The contrast of like the photographer and like what Western media is trying to show of Kosovo, that kind of in a way does dehumanize it, because it turns it into nothing but like a victim, like just a country that is full of endless suffering by our understanding of it, but then to go and actually see it and see that people, while struggling, are living lives that aren't that much different than people in France and other countries.
I guess that's a good point. I didn't even make that connection.
I mean, this this is a podcast that we're recording with the idea that somebody might want to listen to it at some point, but I'm now going to reference Hasib, who we work with at Hungry Highways, who's from Syria and was a doctor there, and now he delivers pizzas with us, which is probably not as good as being a doctor. And he doesn't want to return because, everyone's getting shot there. So even though he hates America, he also he's decided that he would rather be here, a place that he hates and doesn't feel like he's treated very well, than a place where there were people getting shot, which is a horrible but understandable decision. And I think that's the same decision that that lady makes.
And it's possible that even as a beggar, she's making more money than she would be able to make doing whatever work that she is able to do in Kosovo, which might be nothing. She doesn't do any real like job there in the time that we see her. Did everyone just stop talking for?
Yeah.
Yep.
I think we paused there for a minute.
We'll fix that in post.
Rounding third.
So, I guess what do we think of the cast overall, of the actors themselves? I mean, obviously, I think we all like Juliette Binoche as an actress, and the guy that plays.
That's not true.
You don't like Juliette Binoche?
I mean, she's fine,
Oh, okay.
but I don't think she's impressive in any way.
I assume.
I mean, I would say that I liked her in Certified Copy, and that here she was fine. I hated her in Cache. So overall,
I was gonna say I actually Cache was the movie that I liked her the least in. And I don't attribute that to her. I attribute that more to Michael Haneke.
I forgot that she was in that movie. That's how well I remember it.
But everything else I've seen her in, she's been, if not the best, one of the best things about. She was certainly amazing in Certified Copy, and she's probably my favorite thing in this movie. I'd say, yeah, she's definitely my favorite thing in this movie. She was my favorite thing in Cosmopolis. I don't remember what else I've seen.
I like her a lot in Blue. She's great in Blue.
I forgot that she was in Cosmopolis.
A movie overall that I didn't enjoy, but I enjoyed her. She was the only person I enjoyed.
I would say probably my favorite performance was about 8 lines, and it was the sister of the black kid at the beginning, the one who's saying that the guy's never going to come back, that her dad's never going to come back, and is just kind of sarcastic about their chances. She was the only acting performance that really stood out for me. The rest of them were all, I mean, I feel like this happens a lot when you watch really directory films where all of the acting performances, just feel like they're little toys or whatever to get things to work.
I was going to say, I mean, to bring it back to something we talked about completely earlier, but I forgot to mention at the time, one of the things I did like about the subway scene is that the Arab kid, there's a kind of, I mean, even though he's an asshole throughout the scene, there's an interesting sort of complexity to his dickish behavior where he seems very aware of how others are perceiving him and intentionally playing on that, like talking to the Juliette Binoche, who we don't even know is Juliette Binoche at first, asking her, things about, just commenting on her privilege and how she is probably perceiving him, even though he ends up being a total dick through the whole encounter.
He's a troll.
Yeah.
He's aware of what's going on and is intentionally trying to provoke people. So
it's true. Yeah.
He's not an idiot.
Which I think is an interesting portrayal of that in and of itself, because generally when people play on those tropes of like scary othering people, they're very unaware of their scariness. They are just two-dimensional, sort of monstrous types.
Yeah. Or in the case of Paul Haggis's Crash, they know that that the other people find them scary, and then they decide to carjack them after being like, that person's racist for finding us scary. Now let's carjack her.
That'll teach her. I've still never seen that movie.
That's her punishment for being racist, is having her racism reinforced. That's what you get for being racist. We're going to make you more racist. I don't think we could ever publish this podcast, by the way, because we keep calling everyone like the black kid or the Arab kid. Everyone will just think we're horrible people.
No, well, I mean, I don't.
Gonna have to go in
the characters are I mean, that kid on the subway is obviously not identified by name, so he's just
Yeah.
that dick on the subway.
Would we call him the? Would we call him the white kid though?
Yeah, that's true.
If he were white, we wouldn't. So
We just call him the asshole kid.
yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, the guy that helps her too is also, I believe he's also Arab. I saw him. I think
Is he?
I saw him referred to as the. I think his character is actually called in the credits the Old Arab. This is that's the name of his character in the credits. So the guy that helps her, because there's actually that's the kid's name is the Young Arab, and the other character's name is the Old Arab. So they are actually called that in the credits of the film.
He should do a sequel that's a buddy cop movie and they can call it The Old and the Young Arab. Where they fight crime. The crime being women not feeling like they're going to be, sexualized and judged in public. The ability to go from home to some other place without feeling awful. That's the crime that they fight. And racism. Well, I think after talking about it, I like it a little bit less than I did after watching it. So I think you guys made some fair points.
I think I might like it a little bit more. So we're all coming together to mediocrity.
We're all coming together. 2.5 stars for everyone.
Well, I'm still a bit higher than that, but yeah.
I would actually watch it again. I wouldn't feel like I was wasting my time watching it again, just to see if I could get more of the connections this time. So that I will say that about the movie. It's not one that I don't want to revisit like Cache or Funny Games.
I'm never gonna watch Cache again.
Yeah, I Michael Haneke, your best work so far.
I'll agree to that. I've seen Time of the Wolf also, which I thought was terrible. So that's one more. Way to go.
Hooray, you did it, dude.
Oh, didn't you see Amore also? Did you forget about that completely, Reuben?
Oh yeah, I saw Amore. I forgot that I saw Amore. I think you would probably like Amore because it's his least heavy-handed, probably, of the ones that I've seen. Cache, Amore, and this. And it has there's a dream sequence in Amore. That's like straightforward, like kind of stereotypical horror that, and it's really well done. And it's like, it made me kind of a little bit sad when I was watching the movie that he just didn't do he doesn't just do like a straightforward horror film, because it would probably be really scary and work really well.
So that sounds more like of him showing off. He's like, hey guys, I could do this if I want to. I just don't want to, so I'm going to do what I want.
I don't know.
I feel like you might have come into this movie with some preconceived notions.
Don't we all?
I mean,
I've met Haneke, and he would not pump the tap at the keg, and he kept talking about... He kept asking people where the boxed wine was from. Oh, it's Australian grapes? That's terrible. And so I don't like his movies. Because I met him at a party once and he was a dick.
He insulted my girlfriend.
He's casually dismissive about Miley Cyrus's movie.
I've gotten further and further into like a black hole as this recording has gone along. Like, if you can see my video, I'm just like completely shrouded in mystery, When I started,
I forgot to close my window, so I'm pretty sure that a whole bunch of my neighbors just heard me talking really loudly about something that they didn't understand at all.
He's talking about Arabs and black people, and I don't know.
Yeah. But it sounds like he's trying to figure out solutions to racism. I don't know what to make of this.
All right.
I think that's good.
As good a place as any.
Let's call
to
wrap.
end it.
All right.
Thank you for listening,
Let's call
strangers.
a wrap on.
Yes, thank you for listening to podcast number 1.
Haneke's birth evolution.
Loose cannons.
This has been.
This is Loose Cannons, podcast 1. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.
They can't hear that. I gave them a thumbs up and they couldn't hear it.